first read this story, I thought it had a ring of truth in it, like maybe it was true, maybe it really happened. And so here's the story. At the edge of a large city, there stood a big house, and around the house on all four sides, there was a beautiful garden. And in the house, there lived a happy family. A mother, a father, a very little girl, and an elderly grandmother. The little girl's name was Katrina, and she loved her grandmother so much, she would do anything she could.
Can you hear her?
Can you hear me now? How's this? Any better?
You want to put it on the stand, maybe? Is that better for you?
I'm not holding it close enough?
Just close enough, that's it.
Just keep it really close.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it like this. Okay. The little girl's name was Katrina, and she loved her grandmother very much. She would do anything she could to make her grandmother happy. Now, her grandmother's room was on the north side of the house, and it was pretty dreary in there because the sun never came in. And Katrina often wondered how she might be able to get the sunlight to come into her grandmother's room. And when she played out in the garden, she noticed that the sun fell on the flowers, and they seemed to be able to hold that golden light, and the leaves on the trees caught the sun. And when she leaned forward to smell the roses, she noticed that the sunlight was caught in her hair and on her arm, and that gave her an idea. Maybe I can collect the sunlight on myself and take it to my grandmother. And so she ran as fast as she could into the house, but as soon as she got into the front door, the sun disappeared. But she went to see her grandmother anyway, and grandmother said, "Oh, Katrina, I'm so happy to see you. You always bring the sunshine with you. I can see it peeping out of your eyes." Well, Katrina wondered about this, and then she would run over to her grandmother's dressing table and clamber up on the stool and look in the mirror. She was looking to see those sun rays coming out of her eyes, but she couldn't see any. So then she'd go and sit beside her grandmother and listen to her tell beautiful stories about ancient kings and beautiful princesses, until Katerina's eyes just sparkled with joy, and this brought beautiful sunshine to her grandmother's heart. That's the end of that story. This second story is much closer to home. It comes from the Suquamish tribe, which live in a reservation just directly west of Seattle, across the inlet. And here is their tale. In the beginning days of the world, when it was very new, the animals could talk to each other. And nobody talked more than the clams. And no wonder, because their mouths were the full length of their bodies. And they not only talked, they told stories. And some of those stories were true, and some were not. For instance, one morning, Eagle was standing on the beach eating a fish for his breakfast. And the clam at his right foot opened up and said, "Did you know that Raven says he is a better hunter than you are?" Well, the eagle ruffled his feathers in annoyance and scoffed, "Well, that may be so, if you can call picking at carrion hunting." Then another day, Otter came down to play in the water. And a clam said, "Well, I don't think you look silly when you splash around in the water." "Who said I looked silly?" demanded Otter. I perhaps better not say, but you might speak to Beaver, who thinks everyone should work as hard as she does." As you can imagine, it didn't take long before all the animals were squabbling and quarreling amongst each other, and this was because of the gossiping clams. Raven got very tired of this and called a council of all the 2-footed and the 4-footed animals. They all came together in a big circle, and for hours they discussed how they could punish those gossiping clams and stop them from telling stories. But they weren't able to come up with a solution. So Raven said to Beaver, "We know that you work the hardest of any of us, and you will work to find a solution. So we're giving you the problem of how to stop the clams from gossiping." Now Beaver took the challenge, and she went away, and she thought, and thought, and thought. And when she stopped thinking because she was tired, suddenly an idea came to her mind. And so she waddled down to the beach on her short little legs, and there were all the clams lying out on the beach. And she started to collect them up in a big pile, and they said, "Stop, stop, what are you doing?" She said, "You will know soon enough what I am about, and you will no longer be able to spread your mean-spirited tales and false gossip." And when she had them all heaped up in the big pile, she sat down and waited for the tide to go out. And when the tide was at its furthest away, she took as many clams as she could and buried them in the sand until they were all buried in the sand. And they were calling out to her, "Stop, stop!" They were outraged. But Beaver just came back up the beach and sat and waited for that tide to come in. And sure enough, along it came, and the clams, as soon as that water hit them, they couldn't complain anymore. They had to close their mouths because the water and the sand was coming in. And so, if you happen to be walking on the beach today, at low tide, you might see a little squirt of water coming up here and there under the sand, and that is just a clam spitting out the water as it opened its mouth to gossip. Okay, was that loud enough? Could you hear me in the back row? All right. This last story comes from the Ukraine, on the other side of the world. And in the 1700s, in Ukraine, in a little town, a little village actually, called Okopi, it was a Jewish village. And it was just above the border of Romania beneath it, and right next to Romania was Russia, which is now called Moldova. So this little village that he was born in was very close to some very large neighbors. Now this little Jewish boy grew up to be a very powerful and great mystical rabbi. And they gave him the title of Baal Shem Tov, which means teacher or holder of great wisdom. Whenever Baal Shem Tov saw danger lurking on borders and coming towards the Jewish village, he would make a journey into the forest to a sacred place that he knew. And he would light a ritual fire and say a special prescribed prayer. and talk to God and ask Him to send help to save the Jews from destruction. And God always listened to Baal Shem Tov's prayers and sent a miracle, and the Jews were saved. Now, eventually, this good man died and was replaced by another good and holy man. And this man got to be very, very old before trouble again reared its head on the borders. And so he made the journey into the forest, but he was very old. And when he got there and started to get the fire ready, he realized he didn't remember the regulations of what to say and how to do it. But he didn't forget that very special prayer. So he raised his eyes to heaven and said, "O Lord of the universe, I do not know how to light the fire, but here is the prescribed prayer, and this must be sufficient." And it was, for God sent a miracle, and once again the Jews were saved. And then many generations passed, and there was much prosperity and peace in their area. They lived, and a Jew was there, and by this time, when the people went to the rabbi and asked for him to intercede with God, the knowledge of the fire was long lost. The prayer had never been taught to him. It didn't come down. It was just a legend to him that Baal Shem Tov knew about a special place in the forest. He didn't know where it was. He didn't know how to light the fire. So he sat in his own chair at home, and lifting his eyes heavenward, he said, "O Lord of the universe, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know how to say the prayer, but I will tell you my story, and this must be sufficient." And God was listening to his prayer and his story, and sent a miracle, and the Jews again were saved. And so it is to this day. The sacred fire is in our mind. The sacred place is in our heart. And if you tell the story, God will listen. I'd like to end this lovely evening with you with a very whimsical prayer from Romania. Excuse me, not a prayer, it's a poem. Got stuck on the last story. And here it is. We jumped on our saddles and rode far away to collect all the stories that you've heard today. We jumped on spoons and away we flew. Now our stories are done, and may God bless you.